The Trojan War. A war so famous, I imagine most of you listening immediately either pictured a giant wooden horse or Brad Pitt. And I bet that many of you also are thinking that the story is a myth, and that this show is supposed to be about actual historical battles. Well, we are here to discuss not only the story, but the evidence that has been found and continues to be found since 1868 that point to the legend of the Trojan War being more than just an epic story created from the mind of Homer and other poets. The Trojan War may have been real, and today on Historical Quarrels, we explore the myth, the legends, and the truth to uncover the historical events of this epic war. Welcome back to Historical Quarrels, everyone. I am so glad you are listening to today's episode. It's going to be a real treat. The Trojan War, to me, was one of my favorite stories growing up. In grade school, I read Homer's Iliad and Odyssey because I loved Greek mythology. And I was also a big fan of the Percy Jackson series, which I feel like did not actually set me up to to understand what the Greek gods and goddesses were actually like. I remember having like this almost like cognitive dissonance when I first read the Iliad, because Percy Jackson kind of set up the gods to seem like they're not as creepy and rapey, and the Iliad immediately threw away that notion. But yeah, it definitely made me realize how tame and not true to the mythos the gods in Percy Jackson were versus the actual Greek mythos. Which is, probably a good thing, I think, since having Zeus and Aphrodite banging everyone in sight is probably not the best narrative choice for a children's book series about 12-year-olds. So, yeah. Good on you, Rick Riordan. So today, I will be first going over essentially the Wikipedia synopsis of the Trojan War story, as it's done a fine job compiling the information from sources, including Homer's epics and other sources that are non-Homer epics. And I'm doing it this way because also I did not have the time to go in and break down like the pieces of information that Homer will give you about the war and then set it up into a timeline, because Odysseus will have essentially flashbacks to the war in the Iliad and the Odyssey. So that's the Iliad takes place during the war, and then the Odyssey gives flashbacks to other points during the war or a little bit before the war. And so trying to like organize that all with the amount of time that I have for this show, definitely didn't do that. But Wikipedia does a fine job. And so I'll be reading from there, and the information is good. I went and checked the sources, and for the most part, it seemed good, and I'm trusting it. So if you have issues with that, I understand. But I'm hopefully going to do this in a little bit more of like a fun way, other than me just like straight reading from the page. I've gone in and tweaked a few things. Anyways, after that, I will go over how this story was received initially as a historical account. Back when this first came out, everyone was like, "Yeah, that's historical fact," and then why it became to be thought of as a myth. And then how a discovery in 1868 began to reassert the story as a historical account that's just very embellished. So get out your wood carving kits and get ready to fool some Trojans in today's Historical Quarrel. You are listening to Historical Quarrels. Okay. So traditionally, the Trojan War arose from a sequence of events beginning with a quarrel between the goddesses Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Eris, the goddess of discord, was not invited to the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, and so arrived bearing a gift, a golden apple, inscribed "For the fairest." I'm certain many of you are familiar with the origins of the Trojan War, and for those of you unfamiliar, for you, this will be kind of fun. This is essentially like the setup to the war. And back in the day, Greeks would always say like a war began because the gods were quarreling over something and caused mortals to go fight for each other, or fight against each other. So they submitted the judgment to a shepherd they encountered tending his flock. Each of the goddesses promised the young man a boon in return for his favor: power, wisdom, or love. The youth, in fact, Paris, the Trojan prince, who had been raised in the countryside, chose love and awarded the apple to Aphrodite. As his reward, Aphrodite caused Helen, the queen of Sparta, and most beautiful of all women, to fall in love with Paris. And there's a very famous painting called The Judgment of Paris that kind of depicts this scene happening where he's essentially staring at all the goddesses butt naked and being like, who I think is the hottest, when in all reality he was like, who's going to give me the best thing? He didn't actually care about how they looked. So yeah, it's more like who was going to give him what he wanted most, and that was Aphrodite in this case. But this judgment earned him the ire of both Hera and Athena. And when Helen left her husband, Menelaus, the Spartan king for Paris of Troy, Menelaus called upon all the kings and princes of Greece to wage war upon Troy. And it's typically how this has started. Another full exact account of this starts actually with Zeus, who had become king by overthrowing his father Kronos. Kronos in turn had overthrown his father Uranus, and Zeus was super afraid that, like how the cycle had already repeated twice with Kronos and then him, it was going to happen again. So he's getting really scared that his kids that he was siring on Earth with all the mortals he was, having sex with as a goose or like a swan, was going to come back to bite him one day, other than, Hera just getting, super pissed at him and cutting his dick off. But yeah, since Zeus believed there were too many people populating the Earth, he envisioned Momus or Themis, who was to use the Trojan War as a means to depopulate the Earth, especially of his demigod descendants. Make sure all them kids are dead, then he doesn't have to worry about it. This origin is supported by the Hesiod's account, who says, "Now all the gods were divided through strife. For at that very time, Zeus, who thunders on high, was meditating marvelous deeds, even to mingle storm and tempest over the boundless earth. And already he was hastening to make an utter end of the race of mortal men, declaring that he would destroy the lives of the demigods, that the children of the gods should not mate with wretched mortals, seeing their fate with their own eyes, but that the blessed gods henceforth, even as aforetime, should have their living, and their habitations apart from men. But on those who were born of immortals and of mankind, verily Zeus laid toil and sorrow upon sorrow." So being a demigod was not a great thing. You're basically, your life was going to be shit. So Zeus came to learn from either Themis or Prometheus after Heracles had been released from him, released him from Caucasus, that like his father Kronos, he would be overthrown by one of his sons. And another prophecy stated that a son of the sea nymph Thetis, with whom Zeus fell in love after gazing upon her in the oceans off the Greek coast, would become greater than his father. Not necessarily ruling, but just, greater. For one or both of these reasons, either upon Zeus's orders or because she wished to please Hera, who had raised her, Thetis was betrothed to an elderly human king, Peleus, son of Aeacus. All of the gods were invited to Peleus' and Thetis' wedding and brought many gifts, except Eris, the goddess of discord, who was stopped at the door by Hermes on Zeus' order, because, Zeus didn't want any shit going down. You don't want discord going down. But because of that, she threw the golden apple, which is kind of what I went over earlier. And it, again, on it was inscribed to the fairest. Hera initially claimed it, and then Athena and Aphrodite as well, and they quarreled bitterly over it, and none of the other gods would venture an opinion favoring one for fear of earning the enmity of the other two. They were like, "Nah, I don't want to get killed, get my shit rocked in. Not a good time." So eventually, Zeus ordered Hermes to lead the three goddesses to Paris. So this is the alternative version of the story. A prince of Troy who, unaware of his ancestry, was being raised as a shepherd on Mount Ida because of a prophecy that he would be the downfall of Troy. So essentially, his father saw that he was going to be the downfall of Troy and was like, get the fuck out of here. So after bathing in the spring of Ida, the goddesses appeared to him naked, either for the sake of winning or at Paris's request. Gonna be like, drop them toga ladies. If you want me to judge you, I'm going to have to see all of you. And Paris was unable to decide among them, so the goddesses resorted to bribes. Athena offered Paris wisdom, skill in battle, and the abilities of the greatest warriors. Hera offered him political power and control of all of Asia. Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of power right there. And Aphrodite offered him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. And Paris, of course, awarded the apple to Aphrodite. And after several adventures, returned to Troy, where he was recognized by his royal family. Yeah, and definitely wasn't about to start a war that was just going to utterly annihilate his kingdom. So Peleus and Thetis bore a son, whom they named Achilles. Again, connected to the story, going back to the Peleus and Thetis. It was foretold that he would either die of old age after an uneventful life or die young in a battlefield and gain immortality through poetry. Which is the most shit fucking fortune ever. If a fortune teller came up and told that to me, like, yeah, you're either going to die young in a war or you're going to live old. I'm like, well, no shit. If I went to war, I'm probably going to end up dying during it at some point. I don't know. That's so that's such like a, well, yeah, no shit. No duh. I would die old if I didn't, go fight. Furthermore, when Achilles was 9 years old, Calchas had prophesied that Troy could not again fall without his help. So, again, Achilles is a big part of this. And a number of sources credited Thetis with attempting to make Achilles immortal when he was an infant. I might be pronouncing her name wrong, too. I think it's like Thetis or Thetis. Some of these states that she held him over a fire every night to burn away his mortal parts and rubbed him with ambrosia during the day. Great mothering. That's the way to do it. They don't raise kids like they used to back in the day. Back in my day, we would hold our babies over fires and get all the weakness out early. That's why we have such sniveling, wimpy children nowadays. They cry over everything. Should be walking out with third-degree burns before they're out of the infant ward. Oh, man. Anyways, Peleus discovered her actions and stopped her because he's a good dad and was like, what the fuck? What are you doing? So, and then according to some other versions of the story, Thetis had already killed several sons in this manner, and Peleus' action therefore saved his son's life. She had that, I forget what it's called, but it's like postpartum depression, but then like you hate your kid. And like you kind of like want them to die. Some women go through and it's like super hard. I do not remember the exact name for the disorder, but it sounds like honestly an early account of that, to be honest. While still other sources state that, and this is the most common, and I feel like most people know this one, that Thetis bathed Achilles in the Styx, the river that runs to the underworld, making him invulnerable wherever he was touched by the water. But because she held him by his heel, he was not entirely immersed during the bathing, and thus the heel remained mortal and vulnerable to injury. Hence the expression Achilles' heel for, just like a very specific weakness. Like my Achilles' heel is interrupting myself and trying to make jokes. Which I'm sorry if people don't like that. But again, I don't want to just read this verbatim. So I hope some of my commentaries making this a little more digestible. If not, comment below. Let me know. If it is, comment below. Let me know that too. Anyways, he grew up to be the greatest of all mortal warriors. After Calchas' prophecy, Thetis had hid Achilles in Skyros at the court of King Lycomedes, where he was disguised as a girl. Got that cross-dressing going on. He apparently was perceived as a very beautiful woman when he was dressed in such fashion. So at a crucial point in the war, she assists her son by providing weapons divinely forged by Hephaestus. And we'll kind of get into that later. But so now jumping back over to the Paris Helen story here. So the most beautiful woman in the world was Helen, one of the daughters of Tyndareus, king of Sparta. Her mother was Leda, who had been either raped or seduced by Zeus in the form of a swan. So, and accounts differ over like if that was rape or if it was just, she was like, oh, dang, I want some swan dick. Went got some swan dick. So, choose what you want to believe there. Anyways, accounts differ over which of Leda's 4 children, 2 pairs of twins, between the goddesses Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Eris, the goddess of discord, was not invited to the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, and so arrived bearing a gift, a golden apple, inscribed for the fairest. I'm certain many of you are familiar with the origins of the Trojan War, and for those of you unfamiliar, for you, this will be kind of fun. This is essentially like the setup to the war, and back in the day, Greeks would always say like a war began because the gods were quarreling over something and caused mortals to go fight for each other, or fight against each other. So they submitted the judgment to a shepherd they encountered tending his flock. Each of the goddesses promised the young man a boon in return for his favor, power, wisdom, or love. The youth, in fact, Paris, the Trojan prince, who had been raised in the countryside, chose love and awarded the apple to Aphrodite. As his reward, Aphrodite caused Helen, the queen of Sparta, and most beautiful of all women, to fall in love with Paris. And there's a very famous painting called The Judgment of Paris that kind of depicts this scene happening where he's essentially staring at all the goddesses butt naked and being like, who I think is the hottest, when in all reality he was like, who's going to give me the best thing? He didn't actually care about how they looked. So it's more like who was going to give him what he wanted most, and that was Aphrodite in this case. But this judgment earned him the ire of both Hera and Athena. And when Helen left her husband, Menelaus, the Spartan king for Paris of Troy, Menelaus called upon all the kings and princes of Greece to wage war upon Troy. And it's typically how this has started. Another full exact account of this starts actually with Zeus, who had become king by overthrowing his father Kronos. Kronos in turn had overthrown his father Uranus, and Zeus was super afraid that, like how the cycle had already repeated twice with Kronos and then him, it was going to happen again. So he's getting really scared that his kids that he was siring on Earth with all the mortals he was, having sex with as a goose or like a swan, was going to come back to bite him one day, other than, Hera just getting, super pissed at him and cutting his dick off. But yeah, since Zeus believed there were too many people populating the Earth, he envisioned Momus or Themis, who was to use the Trojan War as a means to depopulate the Earth, especially of his demigod descendants. Make sure all them kids are dead, then he doesn't have to worry about it. This origin is supported by the Hesiod's account, who says, now all the gods were divided through strife, for at that very time Zeus, who thunders on high, was meditating marvelous deeds, even to mingle storm and tempest over the boundless earth. And already he was hastening to make an utter end of the race of mortal men, declaring that he would destroy the lives of the demigods, that the children of the gods should not mate with wretched mortals, seeing their fate with their own eyes, but that the blessed gods henceforth, even as aforetime, should have their living, and their habitations apart from men. But on those who were born of immortals and of mankind, verily Zeus laid toil and sorrow upon sorrow. So being a demigod was not a great thing. You're basically, your life was going to be shit. So Zeus came to learn from either Themis or Prometheus after Heracles had been released from him, released him from Caucasus, that like his father Kronos, he would be overthrown by one of his sons. And another prophecy stated that a son of the sea nymph Thetis, with whom Zeus fell in love after gazing upon her in the oceans off the Greek coast, would become greater than his father. Not necessarily ruling, but just, greater. For one or both of these reasons, either upon Zeus's orders or because she wished to please Hera, who had raised her, Thetis was betrothed to an elderly human king, Peleus, son of Aeacus. All of the gods were invited to Peleus' and Thetis' wedding and brought many gifts, except Eris, the goddess of discord, who was stopped at the door by Hermes on Zeus's order, because, Zeus didn't want any shit going down. You don't want discord going down. But because of that, she threw the golden apple, which is kind of what I went over earlier. And it, again, on it was inscribed to the fairest. Hera initially claimed it, and then Athena and Aphrodite as well. And they quarreled bitterly over it, and none of the other gods would venture an opinion favoring one for fear of earning the enmity of the other two. They were like, nah, I don't want to get killed. Get my shit rocked in. Not a good time. So eventually, Zeus ordered Hermes to lead the three goddesses to Paris. So this is the alternative version of the story. A prince of Troy who, unaware of his ancestry, was being raised as a shepherd on Mount Ida because of a prophecy that he would be the downfall of Troy. So essentially, his father saw that he was going to be the downfall of Troy and was like, get the fuck out of here. So after bathing in the spring of Ida, the goddesses appeared to him naked, either for the sake of winning or at Paris's request. Give me like, drop them toga ladies. If you want me to judge you, I'm going to have to see all of you. And Paris was unable to decide among them, so the goddesses resorted to bribes. Athena offered Paris wisdom, skill in battle, and the abilities of the greatest warriors. Hera offered him political power and control of all of Asia. Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of power right there. And Aphrodite offered him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. And Paris, of course, awarded the apple to Aphrodite. And after several adventures, returned to Troy, where he was recognized by his royal family. Yeah, and definitely wasn't about to start a war that was just going to utterly annihilate his kingdom. So Peleus and Thetis bore a son, whom they named Achilles. Again, connected to the story, going back to the Peleus and Thetis. It was foretold that he would either die of old age after an uneventful life or die young in a battlefield and gain immortality through poetry. Which is the most shit fucking fortune ever. If a fortune teller came up and told that to me, like, you're either going to die young in a war or you're going to live old. I'm like, well, no shit. If I went to war, I'm probably going to end up dying during it at some point. I don't know. That's so that's such like a, well, yeah, no shit. No duh. I would die old if I didn't, go fight. Furthermore, when Achilles was 9 years old, Calchas had prophesied that Troy could not again fall without his help. So again, Achilles is a big part of this. And a number of sources credited Thetis with attempting to make Achilles immortal when he was an infant. I might be pronouncing her name wrong too. I think it's like Thetis or Thetis. Some of these states that she held him over a fire every night to burn away his mortal parts and rubbed him with ambrosia during the day. Great mothering. That's the way to do it. They don't raise kids like they used to back in the day. Back in my day, we would hold our babies over fires and get all the weakness out early. That's why we have such sniveling, whippy children nowadays. They cry over everything. Should be walking out with third-degree burns before they're out of the infant ward. Oh, man. Anyways, Peleus discovered her actions and stopped her because he's a good dad and was like, what the fuck? What are you doing? So, and then according to some other versions of the story, Thetis had already killed several sons in this manner, and Peleus' action therefore saved his son's life. She had that, I forget what it's called, but it's like postpartum depression, but then like you hate your kid. And like you kind of like want them to die. Some women go through and it's like super hard. I do not remember the exact name for the disorder, but it sounds like honestly an early account of that, to be honest. While still other sources state that, and this is the most common, and I feel like most people know this one, that Thetis bathed Achilles in the Styx, the river that runs to the underworld, making him invulnerable wherever he was touched by the water. But because she held him by his heel, he was not entirely immersed during the bathing, and thus the heel remained mortal and vulnerable to injury. Hence the expression Achilles' heel for, just like a very specific weakness. Like my Achilles' heel is interrupting myself and trying to make jokes. So, which I'm sorry if people don't like that, but again, I don't want to just read this verbatim. So I hope some of my commentary is making this a little more digestible. If not, comment below. Let me know. If it is, comment below. Let me know that too. Anyways, he grew up to be the greatest of all mortal warriors. After Calchas' prophecy, Thetis had hid Achilles in Skyros at the court of King Lycomedes, where he was disguised as a girl. Got that cross-dressing going on. He apparently was perceived as a very beautiful woman when he was dressed in such fashion. So at a crucial point in the war, she assists her son by providing weapons divinely forged by Hephaestus. And we'll kind of get into that later. But so now jumping back over to the Paris Helen story here. So the most beautiful woman in the world was Helen, one of the daughters of Tyndareus, king of Sparta. Her mother was Leda, who had been either raped or seduced by Zeus in the form of a swan. So and accounts differ over like if that was rape or if it was just, she was like, oh, dang, I want some swan dick. Went got some swan dick. So, choose what you want to believe there. Anyways, accounts differ over which of Leda's 4 children, 2 pairs of twins, were fathered by Zeus and which by Tyndareus. However, Helen is usually credited as Zeus's daughter. And sometimes Nemesis is credited as her mother. Helen had scores of suitors. I'm talking everybody. Everybody wanted to get with her, not just because like her dad was the king of Sparta, but that was definitely a big part of it. She was fucking hot. And so everyone and their dog was trying to get with her, except for a couple people like Agamemnon wasn't like that into her. And also was married at the time. And his brother was like, I'll go for it. But like, either way, I don't care. And then when the Achaeans left for the war, they did not know the way and accidentally landed in Mysia, ruled by King Telephus, son of Heracles, who had led a contingent of Arcadians to settle there. In the battle, Achilles wounded Telephus, who had killed Thersander. And because the wound would not heal, Telephus asked an oracle what will happen to the wound. And the oracle said, nothing really. Like, you're going to die, bitch. No, the oracles responded, he that wounded shall heal. So essentially, Achilles had to heal him. However, the Achaean fleet would then set sail and was scattered by a storm. So Achilles landed in Skyros and married Damia, and a new gathering was set again in Aulis. Telephus went to Aulis and either pretended to be a beggar, asking Agamemnon to help heal his wound, or kidnapped Orestes and held him for ransom, demanding the wound be healed. Achilles refused, claiming to have no medical knowledge. He was like, I can't do, like, what the fuck are you talking about, buddy? I can't heal you. Odysseus reasoned that the spear that had inflicted the wound must be able to heal it, and so pieces of the spear were scraped off and onto the wound. Definitely didn't give him tinnitus. So Telephus was healed. Telephus then showed the Achaeans the route to Troy. A lot of scholars have regarded this part of the story against Telephus and its resolution as a derivative reworking of elements from the main story of the Trojan War. But it also has been seen as fitting the story pattern of the preliminary adventure that anticipates the events and themes from the main narrative, and therefore as likely to be early and integral to the main story. So if you're wondering like why they, went off on this extra adventure, they're essentially doing some side quests and trying to level up. However, Achilles was like already level 20 and was making the DM super mad. And so the DM decided to scatter them and make it a little harder on the other players who needed to catch up to Achilles' level. So 8 years after the storm had scattered them, the fleet of more than 1,000 ships was gathered again. When they had all reached Aulis, the wind ceased. The prophet Calchas stated that the goddess Artemis was punishing Agamemnon for killing either a sacred deer or a deer in a sacred grove that he wasn't supposed to be hunting in, and also boasting that he was a better hunter than she. The only way to appease Artemis, he said, was to sacrifice Iphigenia, who was either the daughter of Agamemnon or Clytemnestra, or of Helen and Theseus, entrusted to Clytemnestra when Helen married Menelaus. And Agamemnon, of course, refused, and the other commanders threatened to make Palamedes commander of the expedition because he was not willing to kill his daughter. However, according to some versions, Agamemnon relented and performed the sacrifice. But others claim that he sacrificed a deer in her place, or that at the last moment, Artemis took pity on the girl and took her to be a maiden in one of her temples, substituting a lamb. Very reminiscent of other stories in the Bible. Well, of stories in the Bible, specifically the one with, the dad and the son. The dad's getting all ready to kill his son. And then, oh my gosh, why am I forgetting his name? Isaac. Yeah, so The Binding of Isaac, which is a video game. And in the story where his dad binds him up and is getting ready to sacrifice him. And then, an angel's like, nah, don't actually do it. It was just a test. But Artemis was more of like, okay, fine. He doesn't have to kill his daughter. That happened. Anyways, the Achaean forces are described in detail in the catalog of ships in the second book of the Iliad. They consisted of 28 contingents from mainland Greece, the Peloponnese, and the Dodecanese Islands, Crete, and Ithaca, comprising 1,186 pentaconters, ships with 50 rowers. Thucydides says that according to the tradition, there were about 1,200 ships. And that is a lot of ships. And this is something that's important later, because a battle of this scale and that many ships would definitely leave a mark on territory as well as the men geographically. So there would be patterns and stuff that we could dig up and find, which we are kind of finding. I'll get into it a little later, but this is kind of interesting. So these accounts, the ships may have been exaggerated and the amount of forces were probably definitely exaggerated. However, very large forces from around that time period do take similar routes geographically to get to supposedly where Troy is, or at least where they think Troy is. And there's also a couple other battles that were very similar with similar geographic routes during that same time period when this supposedly happened, but of different nations. And we'll also get into that too a little bit later. But these numbers led essentially historians and archaeologists to start looking at okay, well, they would have had this impact on this area. Obviously, there would be some evidence left here or here or here. And when they went and looked, they were able to find that because of this, which is cool. Another catalog of ships is given in the Bibliotheca that differs somewhat but agrees in numbers. Some scholars have claimed that Homer's catalog is an original Bronze Age document, possibly the Achaean commander's order of operations. Others believe it was a fabrication of Homer. Yeah, Homer was they had this many dudes. Just I don't know. I know you could do that for stories, just make up a random number and be it was this many, but it just seems weird to do. The second book of the Iliad also lists the Trojan allies, consisting of the Trojans themselves, led by Hector, and various allies listed as the Dardanians, led by Aeneas, the Zelians, Adrastians, Percotians, Pelasgians, Thracians, Shishonians, spearmen, Paeonian archers, Halizones, Mysians, Phrygians, Maeonians, Miletians, Lycians, led by Sarpedon, and Carians. Nothing is said of the Trojan language at all here, so the Carians are specifically said to be barbarian-speaking, and the allied contingents are said to have spoken many languages. So this was almost like a true First World War in a way, or at least a modern, a ancient known world war between the two groups, which is crazy. With just this many people being involved and these all these different tribes and peoples getting involved. Which, again, there is actually evidence of a very similar battle taking place near Egypt and Assyria, again, that we'll get into. where it seems like people of that many different regions all gathered and fought against an invading force from a potentially Greek-influenced area. Again, we'll get into it more. Also, Egypt. Culture. The Trojans and Achaeans in the Iliad share the same religion, same culture, and the enemy heroes speak to each other in the same language. Though this could just be dramatic effect, as people back then would have probably just learned each other's languages, and so maybe they could have been speaking the same languages. At least the royals would have been, but the armies definitely not. Philoctetes was Heracles' friend, and because he lit Heracles' funeral pyre when no one else would, he received Heracles' bow and arrows. And sorry, I know I'm like jumping around here, but getting back to the main story here, Philoctetes and Heracles' bow and arrows are going to be this important part of the story, like part of a prophecy, essentially. So he sailed with 7 ships full of men to the Trojan War, where he was planning on fighting the Achaeans. They stopped either at Chrysi Island for supplies or in Tenedos, along with the rest of the fleet. Then Philoctetes was bitten by a snake. The wound festered and had a foul smell, and on Odysseus' advice, he peed on it and was healed. So, good for him. That's where we get the idea that you can pee on a wound from a jellyfish and other venomous wounds from, is because of this story from Odysseus. Interestingly enough, as we now know, that is a false notion. Obviously kidding. I mean, it is a false notion, but what he actually did was the Atridae ordered Philoctetes to stay on Lemnos. So Medon took control of Philoctetes' men, and while landing on Tenedos, Achilles killed King Tennes, son of Apollo, despite a warning by his mother that if he did so, he would be killed himself by Apollo. Which is why an arrow is what slays him later on. So from Tenedos, Agamemnon sent an embassy to the Priam king of Troy, composed of Menelaus and Odysseus, asking for Helen's return. The embassy was refused, like they're in love. Philoctetes stayed on Lemnos for 10 years, which was a deserted island, according to Sophocles' tragedy Philoctetes. But according to early tradition, was populated by Menians, just a people, island inhabitants, essentially. Calchas had prophesied that the first Achaean to walk on land after stepping off a ship would be the first to die. Thus, even the leading Greeks hesitated to land. They're like, I don't want to be, I'm not good for that. I don't necessarily want to be the first one. Finally, Protesilaus, leader of the Phylacians, landed first. Odysseus had tricked him to do this and throwing his own shield down to land on, so that while he was the first to leap off his ship, he was not the first to land on Trojan soil. Hector killed Protesilaus in single combat, though the Trojans conceded on the beach. In the second wave of attacks, Achilles killed Cycnus, son of Poseidon. He's killing a lot of demigods here. The Trojans then fled to the safety of the walls of their city. The walls served as sturdy fortifications for the defense against the Greeks. The build of the walls was so impressive that legend held that they had been built by Poseidon and Apollo during a year of forced service to Trojan king Laomedon. Protesilaus had killed many Trojans, but was killed by Hector in most versions of the story, though others list Aeneas and Achates or Ephorbus as his slayer. The Achaeans buried him as a god on the Thracian peninsula across the Troad. A dead god, which, that's everyone's favorite type of deity. After Protesilaus' death, his brother Podarces took command of his troops. The Achaeans besieged Troy for 9 years. This part of the war is the least developed among surviving sources, which prefer to talk about events in the last year of the war, because, that's the most important part of the war. During this time, I imagine there was a lot of, back and forth fighting, probably like rallying more troops, getting more supplies, figuring out more supplies, maybe having peace talks every now and then. But, there's a lot of differing accounts here. So after the initial landing, the army was gathered in its entirety again, only in the 10th year. And Thucydides deduces that this was due to lack of money, because again, wars cost a lot of money. So they raided the Trojan allies and spent time farming the Thracian peninsula. Troy was never completely besieged, thus it maintained communications with the interior of Asia Minor. Reinforcements continued to come until the very end. The Achaeans controlled only the entrance to the Dardanelles, and Troy and her allies controlled the shortest point at Abydos and Sestos, and communicated with allies in Europe. Achilles and Ajax were the most active of the Achaeans, leading separate armies to raid lands of Trojan allies. According to Homer, Achilles conquered 11 cities and 12 islands, which is nuts. According to Apollodorus, he raided the land of the Aeneas in the Troad region and stole his cattle. He also captured Lyrnessus, Pedasus, and many of the neighboring cities, and killed Troilus. It was said that if he reached 20 years of age, Troy would not fall, according to Apollodorus, which, if he left at 15, it took them 8 years to even get to Troy. He would already be 23. So, a little too late there. And then also, like, during this part, he should be like around 31, technically, or around 32 by the time the 10th year, 32 to 33, which is also about the same age Jesus was when he died. I don't know. Sorry, I don't know why I said that, but that's just kind of like an interesting parallel. Anyways, he also took Lesbos and Phocaea, then Colophon and Smyrna and Calzomene and Cyme, or Kyme, and afterwards Aegialos and Tenos, the so-called 100 cities, then in order Adrimitium and Side, then Endium and Lineum and Colone. He took also the Hippopolachian Thebes and Lyrnesius, and further Antandros and many other cities. Which, I feel like in the story, they should have just been like, he took these 3 cities and a bunch of other ones, instead of like naming off all these specific ones. But I guess that is useful for historians now to be like, okay, so let's go look at these cities and see like what damage was done, see what time period the damage was done, and see if that all kind of lines up. If those cities even existed, that's another important part. And it's still debated if like Achilles and like all of them existed, or and like Odysseus existed, or if they were just like made up by Homer as these band of warriors and this essentially historical fiction tale that he wrote. So, but who knows? Cacrides comments that the list is wrong in that it extends too far into the south. Other sources talk of Achilles taking Pedasus, Monenia, Methemna, and Lesbos, and Pesidice. Among the loot from these cities was Briseis from Lyrnessus, who was awarded to him, and Chryseis from the Hippopolachian Thebes, who was awarded to Agamemnon. Achilles captured Lycaon, son of Priam, while he was cutting branches in his father's orchards. Patroclus sold him as a slave in Lemnos, where he was bought by Eetion of Imbros and brought back to Troy. Only 12 days later, Achilles slew him after the death of Patroclus. Or Patroclus. Again, I have a hard time with these names. It's all Greek names. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. I'm trying my best. Nice. Ajax, son of Telamon, laid waste the Thracian peninsula, of which Polymestor, a son-in-law of Priam, was king. Polymestor surrendered Polydoros, one of Priam's children, of whom he had custody. He then attacked the town of the Phrygian king, Telelotas, killed him in single combat, and carried off his daughter, Tecmessa. Because, that's what you did back in the day. You kill someone's dad, and then the daughters of that person you killed is, yours to take, clearly. God damn. The past sounds so brutal. So scary sometimes. Ajax also hunted the Trojan flocks, both on Mount Ida and in the countryside. Numerous paintings on pottery have suggested a tale not mentioned in the literary traditions. At some point in the war, Achilles and Ajax were playing a board game called Peteia, which will probably be an episode on ancient tabletops once that starts releasing, hopefully here in 6 months. Get ready for that. Another show that I'm doing. We'll go over the board game. Anyways, they were so absorbed in the game and oblivious to the surrounding battle, the Trojans attack and reach the heroes, who were only saved by an intervention of Athena, which is nuts. It's fucking crazy that. I kind of get it. You can get so engrossed in a board game that you just don't notice a lot of stuff going on. There was that tale of the Chinese emperor who was playing a board game and was like so involved in it he didn't even notice the palace burning down. So it's a similar story there. We also have the death of Palamedes. So Odysseus was sent to Thrace to return with grain, but came back empty-handed. When scorned by Palamedes, Odysseus challenged him to do better. Palamedes set out and returned with a shipload of grain. Odysseus had never forgiven Palamedes for threatening the life of his son. So in revenge, Odysseus conceived a plot where an incriminating letter was forged from Priam to Palamedes, and gold was planted on Palamedes' quarters. The letter and gold were, quote-unquote, discovered, and Agamemnon had Palamedes stoned to death for treason. That's what you get for dicking around with my son, you asshole. I'm gonna frame you. They try to paint Odysseus as a almost like clever. Homer does in the story is this like clever, work smarter, not harder sort of guy. When a lot of the shit he does just comes off as like criminal, like he was like some sort of like rogue. Essentially, if you're playing D&D, he would definitely be a rogue, like maybe like a rogue fighter mix, or like an assassin fight. Oh yeah, he probably would be an assassin fighter, because that's how he kills most people. It's just outsmarting them. So, however, Pausanias, quoting the Cypria, says that Odysseus and Diomedes drowned Palamedes while he was fishing. And Dictys says that Odysseus and Diomedes lured Palamedes into a well, which they said contained gold, then stoned him to death themselves. So lots of differing accounts here. Again, not super important to the story, but it is an interesting part of the story, just because, again, it's these guys that Homer decided to follow for the whole Trojan War and like their stories, and like, again, it's more than likely just historical fiction that Homer wrote, with again, a lot of more fiction than historical fact, but based on a real event with his own people and events going on, stuff to explain like during the time. Palamedes' father, Nauplius, sailed to the Troad and asked for justice, but was refused. In revenge, Nauplius traveled among the Achaean kingdoms and told the wives of the kings that they were bringing Trojan concubines to dethrone them. Many of the Greek wives were persuaded to betray their husbands, most significantly Agamemnon's wife, Clytemnestra, who was seduced by Aegistheus, son of Thyestes. So, she was like, oh, what? He's digging down some Trojans? Oh, well, this guy looks hot. So, and it's going to make Agamemnon real sad. It's going to turn him into a cuck boy. So, near the end of the 9th year, since the landing, the Achaean army, tired from the fighting and from the lack of supplies, mutinied against their leaders and demanded to return to their homes. According to the Cypria, Achilles forced them to stay. And according to Apollodorus, Agamemnon brought the wine growers, daughter of Aeneas, son of Apollo, who had the gift of producing by touch wine, wheat, and oil from the earth, in order to relieve the supply problem of the army. But if he could have done that from the beginning, why didn't he just do that? It's like infinite food and water. Yeah, your troops would have been fine. God damn. So Chrysis, a priest of Apollo and father of Chryseis, came to Agamemnon to ask for the return of his daughter. Agamemnon refused and insulted Chrysis. who prayed to Apollo to avenge his ill treatment. Enraged, Apollo afflicted the Achaean army with plague. So Agamemnon was forced to return to Chryseis to end the plague, and took Achilles' concubine Chryseis as his own. So enraged at the dishonor Agamemnon had inflicted upon him, Achilles decided he would no longer fight. Like, asshole, taking my concubine, you dick. He asked his mother, Thetis, to intercede with Zeus, who agreed to give the Trojans success in the absence of Achilles, the best warrior of the Achaeans. He was that spiteful. He's like, hey, ask Zeus to like fuck up, the army that I'm fighting for, because like these guys are being dicks right now. After the withdrawal of Achilles, the Achaeans were initially successful. Both armies gathered in full for the first time since the landing. Menelaus and Paris fought a duel, which ended when Aphrodite snatched the beaten Paris from the field. Because, Paris was not a fighter, he was a lover. So with the truce broken, the armies began fighting again. Diomedes won great renown amongst the Achaeans, killing the Trojan hero Pandaros and nearly killing Aeneas, who was only saved by his mother, Aphrodite. With the assistance of Athena, Diomedes then wounded the gods Aphrodite and Ares. During the next days, however, the Trojans drove the Achaeans back to their camp and were stopped by the Achaean wall by Poseidon. The next day, though, with Zeus's help, the Trojans broke into the Achaean camp and were on the verge of setting fire to the Achaean ships. An earlier appeal to Achilles to return was rejected, but after Hector burned Protesilaus' ship, he allowed his companion Patroclus to go into battle, wearing Achilles' armor and lead his army. Patroclus drove the Trojans all the way back to the walls of Troy, and was only prevented from storming the city by the intervention of Apollo. Patroclus was then killed by Hector, who took Achilles' armor from the body of Patroclus. Achilles, maddened with grief over the death of Patroclus, swore to kill Hector in revenge. And this is where a lot of people are like, so, they were definitely more than just friends, because of this. The only time I would go, like, probably mad crazy is if someone hurt one of my kids or my wife. So I kind of get why people assume this. The exact nature of Achilles' relationship to Patroclus is the subject of a lot of debate. Although certainly very close, Achilles and Patroclus were never explicitly cast as lovers by Homer, obviously, but Homer also had a lot of tendencies to like just not. He seemed to only have like traditional marriages between like a man and a woman pop up, and never really seemed to indicate a lot of homosexuality in his stories. But they were depicted as such in the archaic and classical periods of Greek literature, particularly in the works of Aeschylus, Aeschines, and Plato. He was reconciled with Agamemnon received Briseis' back untouched by Agamemnon. So Agamemnon didn't bang them, and so and he received a new set of arms forged by the god Hephaestus and returned to the battlefield. He slaughtered many Trojans and nearly killed Aeneas, who was saved by Poseidon. Achilles fought with the river god Scamander, and a battle of the gods followed. So, that's cool. Achilles fighting gods out there, and everyone else is, just fighting men and dying. The Trojan army returned to the city, except for Hector, who remained outside the walls because he was tricked by Athena. And Achilles killed Hector, and afterwards he dragged Hector's body from his chariot and refused to return the body to the Trojans for burial. The body nevertheless remained unscathed, and it was preserved from all injury by Apollo and Aphrodite. The Achaeans then conducted funeral games for Patroclus. Afterwards, Priam came to Achilles' tent, guided by Hermes, and asked Achilles to return Hector's body. The armies made a temporary truce to allow the burial of the dead. And the Iliad ends with the funeral of Hector. So, and that's the end of essentially book one of this two-parter here. And yeah, I will say, my opinion, I do think Patroclus and Achilles were banging. They were definitely bumping uglies, or at least very in love with each other. Definitely could have been in a romantic sense. May have not have been. But all I'm saying is Achilles was dressing up as a woman for a long time. He might have, felt a little more comfortable being, in that. Well, actually, no. He felt more comfortable fighting as a warrior. So I don't know. I feel like he would identify as a warrior. That's for sure. But definitely interesting because like after Achilles dies, they bury his ashes with Patroclus, and there's a bunch of other stuff that really heavily indicate that they were lovers, and more than likely they were pretty sure they were lovers. So we're going to just assume that here. So shortly after the burial of Hector, Penthesilea, queen of the Amazons, arrived with her warriors. Penthesilea, daughter of Otrera and Ares, had accidentally killed her sister, Hippolyte. She was purified from this action by Priam, and in exchange she fought for him and killed many, including Machaon. So yeah, some warrior women in this, kicking some ass, which is real cool. And according to one version, Achilles himself, who was resurrected at the request of Thetis, in another version, Penthesilea was killed by Achilles, who would later mourn her after her death. Thersites, a simple soldier and the ugliest Achaean, taunted Achilles over his grief and gouged out Penthesilea's eyes. Achilles slew Thersites, and after a dispute sailed to Lesbos, where he was purified for his murder by Odysseus after sacrificing to Apollo, Artemis, and Leto, other gods. This again after he was supposedly resurrected, which again also kind of follows the story of Jesus, which is interesting, and especially since the Christians would have a lot of Greek influence later. But the Bible was written by, the Old Testament has already been written, so, had no effect there, but the New Testament, definitely not written yet. While they were away, Memnon of Ethiopia, son of Tithonus and Eos, came with his host to help his stepbrother Priam. He did not come directly from Ethiopia, but either from Susa and Persia, conquering all the peoples in between, or from the Caucasus, leading an army of Ethiopians and Indians. Like Achilles, he wore armor made by Hephaestus. In the ensuing battle, Memnon killed Antilochus, who took one of Memnon's bows to save his father Nestor. Achilles and Memnon then fought. So Zeus weighed the fate of the two heroes. The weight containing that of Memnon sank, and he was slain by Achilles. Because Achilles is, he's the main character of the story. This is the guy. Well, not in like the Odyssey, that's Odysseus, but for the war, it's Achilles. And Achilles chased the Trojans to their city, which he entered. The gods, seeing that he had killed too many of their children, decided that it was his time to die. It was time for him to go. He was too OP, a little too strong. He was killed after Paris shot a poisoned arrow that was guided by Apollo, which is where in the movie Troy, you see Paris kind of like shooting him during the sacking of Troy. But in this, actually, Achilles dies before they do the Trojan horse. So, that's important to note. So in another version, he was killed by a knife to the back or heel by Paris while marrying Polysena, daughter of Priam, in the temple of Thymbraean Apollo, the site where he had earlier killed Troilus. Both versions conspicuously deny the killer any sort of valor, saying Achilles remained undefeated on the battlefield. Essentially, like the only way he was able to be killed was, by assassination or by deceit, and so he never actually lost a battle. He was just sneak attacked into oblivion. So his bones were mingled with those of Patroclus, and funeral games were held. Like Ajax, Achilles is represented as living after his death in the island of Leuc at the mouth of the Danube River. A great battle raged around the dead Achilles. Ajax held back the Trojans while Odysseus carried the body away. Odysseus doesn't do a lot of fighting himself. He just kind of plans, organizes, and then, fucks off for the most part. When Achilles' armor was offered to the smartest warrior, the two that had saved his body came forward as competitors. Agamemnon, unwilling to undertake the invidious duty of deciding between the two competitors, referred to the dispute to the decision of the Trojan prisoners, inquiring of them which of the two heroes had done the most harm to the Trojans. Alternatively, the Trojans and Pallas Athena were the judges. In that, following Nestor's advice, spies were sent to the walls to overhear what was said. A girl said that Ajax was braver. So, and this is a quote from the story. For Aias took up and carried out the strife of the hero, Peleus the son, this great Odysseus cared not to do. To this, another replied by Athena's contrivance, Why, what is this you say? A thing against reason and untrue. Even a woman could carry a load once a man had put it on her shoulder. But she could not fight, for she would fail with her fear, and if she should fight. Which is, again, very sexist. Very not true. Yeah, lots of women could definitely still fight. And they're not going to feel, fear. I feel like everyone feels fear, and fear is a healthy thing to do. It's just a matter of if you're going to just let it rule you, or if you're going to rule it. So according to Pindar, the decision was made by secret ballot among the Achaeans. In all story versions, the arms were awarded to Odysseus. Driven mad with grief, Ajax desired to kill his comrades, but Athena caused him to mistake the Achaean warriors the cattle and their herdsmen. In his frenzy, he scourged two rams, believing them to be Agamemnon and Menelaus. In the morning, he came to his senses and killed himself by jumping on the sword that had been given to him by Hector, so that it pierced his armpit, his only vulnerable part. And according to an older tradition, he was killed by the Trojans, who, seeing he was invulnerable, attacked him with clay until he was covered by it and could no longer move, thus dying of starvation. Pretty smart, honestly. If someone can't be, hit with weapons, you trap him. Maybe drown him, suffocate him. I'm surprised that the clay didn't just cover up his mouth and nose and he just couldn't breathe and died that way. But there's plenty of ways to kill people who are invincible. Just find other ways for them to die, typically. And then after the 10th year, it was prophesied that Troy could not fall without Heracles' bow, which was with Philoctetes in Lemnos. So Odysseus and Diomedes retrieved Philoctetes, whose wound had healed. Philoctetes then shot and killed Paris. Because he had to die. And according to Apollodorus, Paris's brothers Helenus and Dephobus vied over the hand of Helen, and Dephobus prevailed, and Helenus abandoned Troy for Mount Ida, which I don't know. Helenus and Helen, that would have been really confusing. Both would have responded essentially to the first part of their names. Anyways, Calchas said that Helenus knew that the prophecies concerning the fall of Troy. So Odysseus waylaid Helenus, and under coercion, Helenus told the Achaeans that they would win if they retrieved Pelopis's bones, persuaded Achilles' son Neoptolemus to fight for them, and stole the Trojan Palladium. The Greeks retrieved Pelopis's bones and sent Odysseus to retrieve Achilles' son, who was hiding from the war in King Lycomedes' court in Skyros, like his father, before him. Odysseus gave him his father's arms. Eurypylus, son of Telephus, leading, according to Homer, a large force of Kitaoi, or Hittites, spearmen, essentially, or Mysians, according to Apollodorus, arrived to the aid of the Trojans. Eurypylus killed Machaon and Peneleos, but was slain by Neoptolemus, or Achilles' kid. So disguised as a beggar, Odysseus went to spy inside Troy, but was recognized by Helen. Homesick, Helen plotted with Odysseus. Later, with Helen's help, Odysseus and Diomedes stole the Palladium. The end of the war came with one final plan. Odysseus devised a new ruse, a giant hollow wooden horse. This is where the story of the horse comes from. An animal that was sacred to the Trojans. It was built by Epeius and guided by Athena from the wood of a cornel tree grove sacred to Apollo, with the inscription, "The Greeks dedicate this thank offering to Athena for their return home." The hollow horse was filled with soldiers, led by Odysseus. the rest of the army burned the camp and sailed for Tenedos. When the Trojans discovered that the Greeks were gone, believing the war was over, they joyfully dragged the horse inside the city because they're like, yay! They left. We won. It's over. While they debated what to do with it, some thought they ought to hurl it down from the rocks. Others thought they should burn it, which I bet you if they were the soldiers inside were like, swear to God, Odysseus, if that's what they do, I am going to murder you before we die. I'm going to strangle you right before we die. But while others said they ought to dedicate it to Athena. Both Cassandra and Laocoon warned against keeping the horse. While Cassandra had been given the gift of prophecy by Apollo, she was also cursed by Apollo, never to be believed. So she foretold events to come true, and even though like she would be doing the shit and like it would happen, people would still be like, nah, but like, nah, just nah, which is so funny to me. You're like, I literally said this is exactly what was going to happen. You all still don't believe me. Assholes. You all deserve to die. And that was her lot to bear in life because of Apollo. Anyways, serpents then came out of the sea and devoured either Laocoon and one of his two sons, Laocoon and both his sons, or only his sons. So a portent which so alarmed the followers of Aeneas, they withdrew to Ida. The Trojans decided to keep the horse and turned to a night of mad revelry and celebration. They partied hard. I'm talking like rave music was popping off for the Trojans. Like, it was a good time. Sinon, an Achaean spy, signaled the fleet stationed at Tenedos when it was midnight and the clear moon was rising. And the soldiers from inside the horse emerged and killed the guards. The Achaeans entered the city and killed the sleeping population. A great massacre followed, which continued into the day, which the description of this is fucking nuts. It said, blood ran in torrents. Drenched was all the earth. As Trojans and their alien helpers died, here were men lying, quelled by bitter death, all up and down the city in their blood. Which, man, that like they're essentially saying there was not like a spot that was clean, or like at least not like smeared with a little bit of blood from the massacre that would ensue. The Trojans, fueled with desperation, fought back fiercely despite being disorganized and leaderless. With the fighting at its height, some donned fallen enemies' attire and launched surprise counterattacks in the chaotic street fighting. Other defenders hurled down roof tiles and anything else heavy down on the rampaging attackers. The outlook was grim, though, and eventually the remaining defenders were destroyed along with the whole city. Neoptolemus killed Priam, who had taken refuge at the altar of Zeus of the courtyard. Menelaus killed Deiphobus, Helen's husband, after Paris' death, and intended to kill Helen, but, overcome by her beauty, threw down his sword and took her to the ships. Because, he's like, listen, I should kill you, but, like, you want bang? So, and now it kind of, for those of you that are sensitive to topics of sexual violence, this is a part of the story where sexual violence occurs. So if you're sensitive, just skip ahead a couple minutes. Or I'll give you a second. Yeah. Ajax the Lesser raped Cassandra on Athena's altar while she was clinging to her statue. Because of Ajax's impiety, the Achaeans, urged by Odysseus, wanted to stone him to death, but he fled to Athena's altar and was spared. But that it's kind of fucked up. You go desecrate an altar, and then for some reason you get the treatment that should have been afforded to that girl. Asshole, terrible. Like what happens to him is, I'm glad this fucker gets killed because rapists all deserve to die. Antenor, who had given hospitality to Menelaus and Odysseus when they asked for the return of Helen, and who had advocated so, was spared, along with his family. Aeneas took his father on his back and fled, and according to Apollodorus, was allowed to go because of his piety. The Greeks then burned the city and divided the spoils. Cassandra was awarded to Agamemnon, Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, got Andromache, wife of Hector, and Odysseus was given Hecuba, Priam's wife. again, as concubines. So, which is kind of fucked up because Odysseus would sire a kid with a nymph later in his own story. And his wife, stayed faithful to him the entire time he was out doing all this shit. The Achaeans threw Hector's infant son, Astyanax, down from the walls of Troy, either out of cruelty and hate or to end the royal line and the possibility of a son's revenge. They, by usual tradition, Neoptolemus also sacrificed the Trojan princess Polysena on the grave of Achilles, which is, again, just a bunch of extra embellishment to the story. We're here at the very end of it, by the way, so we're going to start getting into the facts here in a second. It's just this all of this is interesting to me, and I think it's fun, adds a bit to it. It's interesting to note, even though, again, it's not real. It's just, this is interesting. So the gods were very angry over the destruction of their temples and other sacrilegious acts by the Achaeans and decided that most would not return home. They're like, listen, y'all fought this because of us, but because you guys did not treat this shit with respect, we're going to kill you. Okay? So a storm fell on the returning fleet of Tenos Island. Additionally, Nauplius, in revenge for the murder of his son Palamedes, set up false lights in Cape Caphareus, also known today as Cavo de Oro, and Euboea, and many were shipwrecked. So now getting to the main characters here. Agamemnon had made it back to Argos safely with Cassandra in his possession after some stormy weather. He and Cassandra were slain by Aegistheus in the oldest versions of the story, or by Clytemnestra, or by both of them. Electra and Orestes later avenged their father, but Orestes was the one who was chased by the Furies. Nestor, who had the best conduct in Troy and did not take part in the looting, was the only hero who had made a fast and safe return. Those of his army that survived the war also reached home with him safely, but later left and colonized Metapontium in southern Italy. So, good for them. Ajax the Lesser, who had endured more than the others, the wrath of the gods, never returned. His ship was wrecked by a storm sent by Athena, for raping that girl, who borrowed one of Zeus's thunderbolts and tore the ship to pieces. The crew managed to land in a rock, but Poseidon struck it and Ajax fell in the sea and drowned. He was buried by Thetis and Mykonos, or Delos. And then Teucer, son of Telamon and half-brother of Ajax, stood trial by his father for his half-brother's death. He was disowned by his father and wasn't allowed back on Salamis Island. He was at sea near Phraetes in Piraeus. He was acquitted of responsibility, but found guilty of negligence because he did not return his dead body or his arms. It's so shitty. It's you're found guilty because you just didn't do this one thing that you apparently had to do. So he left with his army, who took their wives and founded Salamis in Cyprus. The Athenians later created a political myth that his son left his kingdom to Theseus' sons and not to Megara. Neoptolemus followed the advice of Helenus, who accompanied him when he traveled overland, who was always accompanied by Andromache. He met Odysseus, and they buried Achilles' teacher, Phoenix, on the land of the Sicyonians, and they then conquered the land of the Molossians, and Neoptolemus had a child by Andromache, Molossus, to whom he later gave the throne. Thus the kings of Epirus claimed their lineage from Achilles, and so did Alexander the Great. Again, kind of mentioned this earlier, whose mother was of that royal house. Alexander the Great and the kings of Macedon also claimed to be descended from Heracles. Helenus founded a city in Molossia and inhabited it, and Neoptolemus gave him his mother Deidamia as wife. And so, that's what happened. After Peleus died, he succeeded Phthia's throne. He had a feud with Orestes, son of Agamemnon, over Menelaus' daughter, Hermione, and was killed in Delphi, where he was buried. In Roman myths, the kingdom of Phthia was taken over by Helenus, who married Andromache, and they offered hospitality to other Trojan refugees, including Aeneas, who paid a visit there during the wanderings. And then we get to Diomedes, was first thrown by a storm off on the coast of Lycia, where he was to be sacrificed to Ares by King Lysis. But Calero, the king's daughter, took pity upon him and assisted him in escaping. He then accidentally landed in Attica, and Phaleron, the Athenians, unaware that they were allies, attacked them, and many were killed, and Demophon took the Palladium. He finally landed in Argos, where he found his wife, Aegialia, committing adultery. Just walked in and on it, essentially. Like many returning from war, unfortunately. This is actually like a really sad, I wouldn't say like many, but there are quite a few stories of, soldiers returning home, finding their wives banging the neighbor, essentially. So in disgust, he left for Italia. According to later traditions, he had some adventures and founded Canossium and Agrippa in southern Italy. And then Philoctetes, due to a sedition, was driven from his city and emigrated to Italy, where he founded the cities of Petilia, Old Crimissa, and Cone, between Croton and Thurii. So, after making war on the Lucanians, he founded their sanctuary of Apollo the Wanderer, to whom also he dedicated his bow. And then, according to Homer, Idomeneus reached his house safe and sound. Another tradition later formed. After the war, Idomeneus' ship hit a horrible storm, and he promised Poseidon that he would sacrifice the first living thing he saw when he returned home if Poseidon would save his ship and crew. The first living thing he saw was his son, whom Idomeneus duly sacrificed. Shit, man. The gods were angry at his murder of his own son, and they sent a plague decree. Even though he promised the gods, he's like, listen, I will kill the first living thing I see once I get home, if you let me get there safely. And so he did it, and they're like, but you killed your own son, so fuck you. Still, it doesn't matter. Oh man, I love the Greek tragedies here. It's the storytelling here is great. So his people sent him into exile in Calabria in Italy, and then to Colophon in Asia Minor, where he died. Among the Lesser Achaeans, very few reached their homes. Okay. Now we have the house of Atreus. So according to the Odyssey, Menelaus' fleet was blown by storms to Crete in Egypt, where they were unable to sail away because the winds were calm. Only 5 of his ships survived. Menelaus had to catch Proteus, a ship-shifting sea god, to find out what sacrifices to which gods he would have to make to guarantee safe passage. So according to some stories, the Helen, who was taken by Paris, was a fake, and the real Helen was in Egypt, where she was reunited with Menelaus. Proteus also told Menelaus that he was destined for Elysium, heaven, after his death. Menelaus returned to Sparta with Helen 8 years after he had left Troy. Agamemnon returned home with Cassandra to Argos. His wife, Clytemnestra, Helen's sister, was having an affair with Aegisthus, son of Thyestes, and Agamemnon's cousin, who had conquered Argos before Agamemnon himself retook it. Possibly out of vengeance for the death of Iphigenia, Clytemnestra plotted with her lover to kill Agamemnon. Cassandra foresaw this murder and warned Agamemnon, but he disregarded her. He was killed either at a feast or in his bath. Both suck. According to different versions, Cassandra was also killed. Agamemnon's sons, Orestes, who had been away, returned and conspired with his sister Electra to avenge their father. He killed Clytemnestra and Aegisthus and succeeded his father's throne. Which is reminiscent of the not Macbeth, the Shakespeare story. Oh my gosh, why am I forgetting the name? My brain's fried. Yeah, it's fine. My brain's fried. But the story where his uncle killed his dad, it's the one the Lion King's based off of. Oh, dude. Why? I know this was in the play. Oh, my heck. Whatever. Odysseus' 10-year journey home to Ithaca was told in Homer's Odyssey. So Odysseus and his men were blown far, of course, to lands unknown to the Achaeans. There, he had a bunch of adventures, including encounter with the Cyclops and audience with the seer Tiresias and Hades. So he went all over the place, had a lot of fun, did a lot of stuff. Ended up living and banging Calypso for a while because that's what you do. Had a kid, then left home, went home, found out his wife had been faithful to him the entire time. But Penelope tested Odysseus with this unstrung recurve bow to ensure it was him. And so the next day, the suitors' relatives tried to take revenge on Odysseus for coming back home and essentially, not letting them sleep with his wife. But Athena stopped them from the suitors of Penelope killing him. Interesting, and this is kind of unimportant. And I know this is additional fact information, but the story still actually continues after the Odyssey in the Telegony, where Odysseus starts off with the burial of the dead suitors and continues until Telegonus, son of Odysseus and Circe. He didn't bang Calypso, he banged Circe on the island. And this guy, his son comes over and kills him, and is really sad about it. So, and then Telegonus would marry Penelope, so his dad's wife. Then, and Telemachus married Circe. So, okay, we made it to the end of the story. That was totally 100% true. And nothing was embellished at all, and Achilles' mom was completely rational for holding her infant over a fire to burn off his imperfections. Very healthy, normal way to do, feel as a parent. Something you want to do. Well, either burning him or trying to drown him in either story. Obviously kidding. So let's go ahead and ask the question to what happened to the story over time and how it has been received. All right, so let's go over the story over time. So initially, the Trojan War was thought to have been dated around 800 BC by Homer, by Herodotus, which would have been around 400 years before he was born. However, a mathematician would later date the war to have happened around 1184 to 1183 BC, is when it initially took place. This gets debated quite a bit, and according to the BBC, over time, there's this article on the BBC called "Did the Trojan War Actually Happen?" They have some good sources listed here. Essentially, over time, this myth would be brought up by the Romans. The Romans heavily believed in it. It was a big part of their kind of origin story and how their empire was founded, or how they were all related to these different gods and deities, and why all these settlements came to be, essentially. So it isn't surprising, and this is in the article, they say it isn't surprising that people have been convinced of the reality of the Trojan War, because of the grim realities of the battle are described very unflinchingly in the Iliad, that it is hard to believe that they were not based on observation. There's a part in there where a soldier dies by the water and eels and fish just eat him and tear him to shreds. There's a description of Achilles' spears when he spears Hector at the gullet, and they talk about that's how a man is killed the most quickly. And then Troy as well in the book is portrayed in a vivid color, in such a fashion that you can't help but just imagine it while you're reading the book. So it was. And here in the article, they say, it was in fact the prospect of rediscovering Homer's Troy that led the rich Prussian businessman Heinrich Schliemann to travel to what is now Turkey in the late 19th century. Told of a possible location for the city at Hisarlik on the west coast of modern Turkey, Schliemann began to dig and uncovered a large number of ancient treasures, many of which are now displayed at the British Museum. Although he initially attributed many findings to to the late Bronze Age, the period in which Homer set the Trojan War, when they were in fact centuries older. He had excavated the correct excavated the correct location. Most historians now agree that ancient Troy was to be found at Hisarlik, and Troy was real. So this happened around 1869. Or 1868. Evidence of fire and the discovery of a small number of arrowheads in the archaeological layer of Hisarlik that corresponds in date to the period of Homer's Trojan War may even hint at warfare. There are also surviving inscriptions made by the Hittites, an ancient people based in central Turkey, describing a dispute over Troy, which they knew as Wulusa. None of this constitutes as proof of a Trojan War, but for those who believe there was a conflict, these clues are a welcome. It continues, a historic Trojan War would have been quite different from one that dominates Homer's epic. It is hard to imagine a war taking place on quite the scale the poet described, and lasting as long as 10 years when the citadel was fairly compact. As archaeologists have discovered, the behavior of the soldiers in Homer's war, though, seems all too human and real. So, there you have it, for at least this part of history, right? This, essentially, after the Greeks and, like, the Romans and their empires had ended, the tale kind of just kept fading into, like, myth and legends, and it got more and more embellished, and a lot of things changed over time. The story that we have now of, like, what happened is definitely, like, I mean, there's no god, like, we know that there's no Greek gods and Greek goddesses, at least we're pretty sure there's no Greek gods and goddesses. There's always that like 0.0001% chance something crazy like that happened. You know, some crazy shit. But I'm not in that camp of conspiracy theorists that they're like, you know, yeah, the gods are real and they were actually aliens that, like, you know, guided mankind. I'm like, no, I don't think that at all. I think that's just, you know, people are trying to explain, like, why these dudes had these thoughts or, like, these inspirations come to them at times, and they attribute it to supernatural forces, and those forces were described in the personages of the gods, and that's what happened here. So, the Greeks found it in the legacy of the Trojan War, an explanation for the bloody and inferior world in which they lived. Achilles and Odysseus had inhabited an age of heroes. Their age had now died, leaving behind it all the bloodthirstiness, but none of the heroism or martial excellence of the Trojan War. So even the immediate aftermath of the war was full of violence. In a play inspired by Homer and translated by Louis Macnaeus, the Greek tragedian Aeschylus described after the war Clytemnestra murdering her husband, who I kind of went over already, who carelessly, as if it were a head of a sheep, out of the abundance of his fleecy flock, sacrificed his own daughter, Iphigenia, to appease a goddess so that he might have a fair wind for his voyage to Troy. So, regardless of how connected it is to fact, the Trojan War myth had a lasting impact on the Greeks and on us, and has continued to have a massive impact as scholars have found more and more evidence of this actually taking place. So, after Heinrich, in November 2001, geologist John C. Kraft and classicist John V. Luce presented the results of investigations into the geology of the region that had started in 1977. The geologists compared the present geology with the landscapes and coastal features described in the Iliad and other classical sources, notably Strabo's Geographica. Their conclusion was that there is regularly a consistency between the location of Troy, as identified by Schliemann, and other locations such as the Greek camp. The geological evidence and descriptions of the topography and accounts of the battle in the Iliad, although, of course, this could be a coincidence. It could be a complete coincidence, but there's a lot of consistencies for what was described. And again, a lot of the story could have just been, you know, Homer could have traveled and looked at shit and been like, yeah, you know, that's right here. This is where they fought, you know, travel the world and then write in his book. and basing off of like, of where he was at. So since the 20th century, scholars have attempted to draw conclusions based on the Hittite and Egyptian texts that date the time of the Trojan War. While they give a general description of the political situation in the region at the time, their information on whether this particular conflict took place is limited. Andrew Dalby notes that while the Trojan War most likely did take place in some form and is therefore grounded in history, its true nature is unknown. So currently, the idea is this is a war that actually happened. We also have the Tawagalawa letter, which is a fragmentary Hittite text from the mid-13th century BC. It's notable for providing a window into relations between Hittites and Greeks during the late Bronze Age. They mention a kingdom of Ahiawa, Akeo, or Greece that lies beyond the sea. That would be the Aegean and controls Miliwanda, which is identified with Miletus. Also mentioned in this and other letters is the Aswa Confederation, made of 22 cities and countries, which included the city of Wilusa, or Ilios, or Ilium. The Miliwata letter implies the city lies on the north of the Aswa Confederation, beyond the Seha River, while the identification of Wilusa with Ilium, that is Troy, is always controversial. In the 1990s, it gained majority acceptance. In the Alexandru Treaty, which was dated to be around 1280 BC, the king of the city is named Alexandru, and Paris's name in the Iliad, among other works, is Alexander. So, this is, again, giving a lot more evidence towards this being very possibly real. So the Tawagawala letter, dated again around 1250 BC, is addressed to the king of Ahiwa, actually says, now as we have reached agreement on the matter of Wilusa, over which we went to war. So it seems to indicate that there was a war between Wilusa, which again is Ilios or Ilium, and possibly Troy, or at least what they think is Troy, which is exactly a war that, again, was described in that story. So, I don't know, which is just super cool. For a long time, I thought this was just a myth. It's just a cool epic story that was made up. But now we're discovering, like, no, it was real. I mean, gods probably were involved, but like it was very, very probably real. So formerly under the Hittites, the Aswa. All right, so let's go over the story over time. So initially, the Trojan War was thought to have been dated around 800 BC by Homer, by Herodotus, which would have been around 400 years before he was born. However, a mathematician would later date the war to have happened around 1184 to 1183 BC, is when it initially took place. This gets debated quite a bit, and according to the BBC, over time, there's this article on the BBC called "Did the Trojan War Actually Happen?" They have some good sources listed here. Essentially, over time, this myth would be brought up by the Romans. The Romans like heavily believed in it. It was like a big part of like their kind of origin story and how like their empire was founded, or like how they were all related to these different gods and deities, and why all these settlements came to be, essentially. So it isn't surprising, and this is in the article. They say it isn't surprising that people have been convinced of the reality of the Trojan War, because of the grim realities of the battle are described very unflinchingly in the Iliad. That it is hard to believe that they were not based on observation. Like there's a part in there where a soldier dies by the water and eels and fish just like eat him and like tear him to shreds. There's a description of Achilles' spears when he spears Hector at the gullet, and they talk about that's how a man is killed the most quickly. And then Troy as well in the book is portrayed in a vivid color, and it's such a fashion that you can't help but just imagine it while you're reading the book. So it was, and here in the article, they say, it was in fact the prospect of rediscovering Homer's Troy that led the rich Prussian businessman Heinrich Schliemann to travel to what is now Turkey in the late 19th century. Told of a possible location for the city at Hisarlik on the west coast of modern Turkey, Schliemann began to dig and uncovered a large number of ancient treasures, many of which are now displayed at the British Museum. Although he initially attributed many findings to the late Bronze Age, the period in which Homer set the Trojan War, when they were in fact centuries older. He had excavated the correct location. Most historians now agree that ancient Troy was to be found at Hisarlik, and Troy was real. So this happened around 1869. Or 1868. Evidence of fire and the discovery of a small number of arrowheads in the archaeological layer of Hisarlik that corresponds in date to the period of Homer's Trojan War may even hint at warfare. There are also surviving inscriptions made by the Hittites, an ancient people based in central Turkey, describing a dispute over Troy, which they knew as Ulusa. None of this constitutes as proof of a Trojan War, but for those who believe there was a conflict, these clues are a welcome. So, kind of it for today's story. Hope you guys had a good time listening to that. A bit of a longer one today, I know. I said I was going to try and focus on doing shorter tales, but I don't know. I'll probably be mixing it up with some being longer, some just being shorter episodes as I explore this podcasting journey, having a lot of fun. I definitely had like a crazy week this past week. And sorry. For those of you who aren't used to the show and are new here, if you liked what you heard, please like and subscribe. Leave a review if you're listening to it on other platforms other than YouTube. Let people know what you thought of the show. And if you didn't like it, you let me know that too. That's more than fine. It's good to know. It's good to keep trying to improve and do better. So, but this part of the show, typically I kind of give my thoughts on the subject. But I feel like I already kind of did that. So, and then I usually go into channel updates, essentially. It's kind of just like hangout time where I talk about life, talk about other things, which I understand if you're not interested in it. But I mean, if you are, that's more than fine, too. I do it partly for me, partly for those who care. And for those who don't care, they'll be leaving right now. So, thank you for listening to the whole episode, basically. If you're going to be, tuning off, but I'm going to be talking about life. Anyways, these past couple weeks have been a little crazy for me. We got a puppy, which he's been having fun adjusting to life here. It's been good. He's a bit of a troublemaker. He likes to chew up things, He's a little coonhound, blue tick mixed with the other coonhound variety. So it's funny. He's essentially a purebred coonhound, but he has both the blue tick and the red bone variety in him, apparently. So due to that, having a new puppy can be tough, especially with potty and crate training. So potty training's been a little difficult. So far he's starting to get it. He's starting to freak out. Nope, never mind. Sorry. Maybe. Okay. But anyways, potty training's been a little difficult. So I've had to kind of like stay up, just kind of downstairs by his crate And so as soon as he whines, I just take him out to go potty, and then getting him used to his crate and his like the little kennel so that he can sleep in there and feel safe and comfortable has been a little tricky too. So a lot of late nights. I essentially went like 3 days without sleep, and I started getting like super fucking manic and paranoid about everything. It was really weird. Man, I did some stuff while I was paranoid that I'm like, why did I didn't even need to like, man, there's this podcast I listened to, and one of their producers left, and a friend of mine is friends with like the host. So let me know that like the producer was leaving. It was like, I'd asked if like they had replaced him, and like, no, like maybe you should apply. And then I did. And then in my state of paranoia while I was sleep deprived, after like they told me no, but like they weren't hiring for that spot, and you know they didn't really need that position filled right then and there. And then they announced that the guy was leaving later, and in my paranoia, I started thinking like, I was like, oh, dude, wait, no, what if they thought that like I was essentially just like using that friend to like try and get like a job, and like I was just like jumping like, you know, shark jumping and like going for blood as soon as like something opened up, and like what if they think like I'm an asshole for that, and like that's all I want, and you know they're gonna, oh my god, like, and then like this and this and this, and like I started getting like way into depth about it, and so I typed up this email apologizing for applying for the position essentially, and sent it. And oh man, I way over explained that email. I was like reading it, I was like, oh my god, I was so paranoid, and I hadn't gotten sleep, and so my mind was like, you know, making up all these conspiracies essentially, and it was so embarrassing, super embarrassing. So if like I'm blushing right now because of it. So if by the grace of God, if they're somehow listening to this, I am so sorry. You probably didn't need to get that email. I probably didn't assume the things that I like brought up in there I was apologizing for. Again, my mind was just fucking gone, and it had been like a stressful week at work too, where you know, you get done with the day, but like the day still isn't over because there's just a bunch of other stuff you still have to like think about and get ready for the next day. It was like that every day for these past couple weeks, and I'm still kind of going into that tomorrow. And hopefully by the start of February, it won't be like that anymore, but I know it will be. It's just my job. So I had that. So I was just, man, I've been like going through it and like trying to figure out like how to, I don't know, just like not have that happen again. Cause oh my God, I'm so embarrassed by that. Like it's like, why would they assume that like I was coming from that bad of a place? I don't know. I don't, now that I'm thinking about it, it's like, I didn't give them like any actual reason to think that. So yeah, my mind on like 1 hour of sleep after 3 days is not a great place to be, I have discovered. Besides that, I'm still working on Ancient Tabletops. That show is going to be much more produced. It's going to be more of like a YouTube show. I don't think I might release some episodes as like a podcast because the audio version will be, you know, still semi-interesting to listen to, but it's definitely going to be a bit more of a visual medium. So if you want to, I guess like see any early footage of that or early clips, I'll probably be uploading some to Patreon here in like a couple months after the scripts are finished for the first 10 or so episodes. So I'm going to write out the first 10 or so episodes and then start shooting them one by one and getting them ready to edit. And then I'm going to probably just have the show be something I do monthly. So because of how long it's going to take to produce and make, and then like with this show already taking up quite a bit of my time, doing that with a full-time job is just kind of going to be difficult to manage. So I feel like if I got 10 episodes ready, had about 10 months essentially worth of content for it. And again, very heavily edited. Like I've been essentially learning how to edit video very well on the editor that I use. And so I'm trying to do that a bit better, get the production quality up for the show. Also the scripts, and it's going to be like a short, again, like 5 to 10 minute episode per board game, and like the setup that I'm going to have for it. And I know it's going to be super niche, but I don't care. I want it to be niche. I want it because like I love board games and I love history. So, but yeah, that. So if you want like early updates to that, and you want to check out some of that stuff, go to the Patreon. But like I said, I probably won't be doing that for at least a few months. I might kind of like release some like early scripts and like ideas for the episodes there, just for you guys to read. If anyone does ever subscribe to the Patreon. So like that's what I'll be doing. There's a free tier as well, which I think I'll just put some like, again, the scripts and stuff out as like free tier content. And then anything I record and shoot as like early access stuff that will be paid for subscriptions. So, and again, the best way to help support the show and grow the show is through that or by sharing. Cause like, I don't know. I mean, honestly, with more time and like if the show started making money, then I could put more time and effort into it, produce it a little bit heavier. I am upgrading my first piece of external equipment, which will be the video here soon. So I should be getting a new webcam by Friday. And then I'm looking at getting my Rodecaster set up so that way the live audio is better and the production quality is better. So hopefully I can get that all done here relatively soon. But I need to get the Rodecaster first. So I'm looking into that and trying to figure out which one to get. Or just really any soundboard that's decent with decent pricing, because I don't want to have to drop like $1,000 or $2,000 on equipment right now. Though I do love this. It's just fun. I don't know. I have a lot of fun doing this, making this, being able to express myself in this way through this medium, through these mediums is a lot of fun and something I enjoy doing. So it's, I don't know. It's, I found that this is something I like doing. So, and I'm glad there's some people that like to listen to me talk. I appreciate you all. That's kind of it for today, man. Again, I'm still kind of embarrassed by like how paranoid I had gotten this past week. So, to those of you that paranoia impacted, because again, there's not that many people listening to this, but for some reason, if those people are listening, I am so sorry. Like that was, I was in a very paranoid, manic state from the sleep deprivation, and definitely just like acted and didn't like think about certain things, and like I didn't think rationally about certain things. I just like immediately was like, yeah, no, I'm totally right about this, and so like this and this and this is obviously also happening. So, it's embarrassing for me. I'm gonna take that as like a lesson learned. I know for the viewers, is like other people that are listening to this, they're probably like, what the fuck are you talking about, Tyler? I don't know right now. I'm still a little tired. I know what I'm talking about. I did something kind of embarrassing, and it was tough. It was tough after waking up this morning and just being like, oh my God, a full night's sleep is what I needed. Oh my God. Oh, what did I do? So that sort of thing. But yeah, I love you guys. You have a good one. And I don't know, enjoy the rest of your week. Bye.